Now, yes, ha. Now I'm on. A warm welcome to everyone here at the Henrik Enderlein Forum of the Hertie School in Berlin and everyone joining us online in the live stream. Good evening to you as well. My name is Amira El Ahl and I'm very much looking forward to accompanying you through the upcoming hour and a half, where we want to talk about gender equality in the cultural economy and the question what it takes to create a level playing field for women in arts, culture and the media. This event marks the launch of a new book by the Hertie School senior professor Helmut Anheier and analytics consultant Darinka Marković, titled Gender Equality in the Cultural Economy, Comparative Perspectives. I don't know if you see it here, no? In which they take a closer look at the forces and structures underlying this complex problem. Before we go into the discussion here on the panel later on the status of women in the creative and cultural industries, Professor Anheier and Darinka Marković will share with us their motivation for conducting this study and give us a summary on the research they conducted, explaining how policies are shaping gender equality worldwide and explore what steps governments should take to advance gender equity in the cultural sector. Let me quickly introduce to you both Professor Anheier and Ms. Marković before you take the floor. Helmut Anheier is Senior Professor of Sociology at the Hertie School and served as its president from 2009 to 2018. He is also a faculty member at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs and a visiting professor at LSE Ideas at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. His research focuses on indicator systems, governance, culture, non-profits, philanthropy, and organizational studies. He has authored over 500 publications in leading journals and is the recipient of numerous national and international awards, and we're very happy that he's here tonight. A warm welcome to you. And Darinka Marković, she's a very versatile professional with expertise as an academic researcher, policy strategist, and data analyst. She has contributed to numerous research projects on international cultural cooperation and the cultural economy. In her current role as an analytics consultant, she specializes in leveraging data to provide meaningful insights for organizations and decision makers, particularly in public and healthcare sectors. A very warm welcome to both of you. The stage is yours, and we're looking forward to hear what you found out in your research.
Thank you very much for your kind words and welcome. Good evening, everyone. It was in the 1970s when art historian Linda Nochlin asked a very provocative question. Right? Why have there been no great women artists? Right? Why don't we have a Pablita Picasso or a Andrea Warhol or a Josephine Beuys? Of course, there have always been great women artists, but compared to men, they had a harder time being recognized, and many of them were more easily forgotten. Most artists are forgotten, of course, but more women artists are forgotten compared to men. And of course, there is something about the art worlds, a term introduced by sociologist Howard Baker 10 years later, that is responsible for that pattern that we find. For example, of the 119 Nobel Prize winners in literature, only 17 went to women. I have to put my glasses on it because I can't read it otherwise, and it is a glare. So, and 2,300 paintings from the 1300s to the 20th century in the National Gallery in London, only 21 are by women, and we find very similar patterns in the Bröhan Museum here in Berlin, and only 2 women have won the Oscars for Best Director in the 94 years of the Academy Awards history, right? And the French Prix Goncourt awarded since 1903, right, has gone to a female writer only 11 times. So there is a pattern there, you might say, and we try to identify two elements here that are very important. And they come actually from the idea of the lost Einstein problem in sociology, that if you have low levels of social mobility in society, that means that a lot of talent is not being discovered, and that's where it's kind of wasteful for society. And it's called the lost Einstein problem. And we took that same idea and we call it the lost Frida Kahlo's problem. And with that, we try to express the lower likelihood of women to get access in the art world. And complementary to that, we have the Bauhaus women problem, right? And that is a pattern of forgetting. And very, very soon, women artists are forgotten, and more likely so than men artists. And you see some of the artwork back there, and one of the pictures is in fact taken from the Bauhaus, and you see how women disappear in the background. And that's exactly what happened in the Bauhaus. In the first cohort entering the Bauhaus, there were more women than men. And that switched around within 8 or 9 years. Then women were the majority, and they were pushed into genre that were more feminine. So not architecture, but knitting, right? And that is what we try to express by the Bauhaus women problem. So in our work, we look at indicators of these two problems, and we look at access, we look at gaps, we look at balance, and we look at balance, work-life balance, and we look at monitoring. To what extent do countries actually monitor inequalities in the field of gender? So that's the background, and I now want to focus on some of the main findings. We do see improvements. I will show you a few slides now. There's clear improvement, but it is uneven across the countries, and there are reasons for that we'll identify later on. The progress is slow, and gaps remain. Right? This is the overall gender inequality measure that we take from EIGE, the European Institute of Gender Inequality. So a number of 100 would be perfect equality. Right? And you see that none of these countries comes close to it, but some are closer than others. And if you look at the arrows, right, some countries are actually moving back. Right? Some are moving up. So there's something going on, and we have to understand what are the policies behind that. This is a very encouraging chart, and you see that there is more access to women in the boards of large listed corporations. Now, this is not necessarily arts and culture, right? But this is in the large corporations. Then you see where we were back there in 2010 and where we are right now, right? And this is the share of women in cultural employment, which has also increased, but then there's a COVID effect that you see right here, right? And now this is not so good news. This is the pay gap. The gender pay gap in arts and culture, in the cultural economy. And you see, if that is no gender pay gap, right? That's when men and women would be paid the same. And all countries are below that, right? And there is not a massive improvement, right? So the numbers here are not too different from the numbers here. Why? Right? And this is a bit better. This is reconciling work and life and family life. That's the pension gap. So if men and women had the same pension, they would be up here, right? And you see that pensions for women are substantially lower, right? And that's in the field of arts and culture. Then they were a bit higher, but not that much, right? And later on, we will tell you the reason why we think that pay gap and the pension gap is so persistent, right? And now I want to turn over to Darinka. She will give us a more detailed look at the different countries, and then I come back and try to summarize it all. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a clicker. All All right, well, thank you all for being here, for your interest in gender equality, especially in cultural economy. So Professor Anheier introduced important first concepts, but now I would like to tell you more about each of the countries, at least main findings, and what data tells us. So starting with France, and I'm sure when you hear France, you have this image of a cultural nation and very well developed culture and economy. And that's for a reason, because France dedicates a lot of public support to culture. We have a lot of artistic funds that support these creators. And there's this idea of culture as being public good, right? So this is not commercial good, it's cultural exception. It's something that we want to nurture no matter what commercial product is. And as Professor Anheier just showed in the previous slide in the Gender Equality Index, France is somewhere there at the top, just trailing off of behind Sweden. And among the EU 27 countries, it's actually the 5th. So why is this the case? Well, first of all, because there are dedicated institutions for gender equality. So they have taken this institutionalized approach. And of course, public funding, dedicated public funding and legislation. So for example, quotas. When it comes to pay gaps, as we saw, it's not a rosy picture. Pay gap is fluctuating, but does not seem to bulge. According to national statistics, so, and this is only culture and arts in France, women still earn 19% less than men in these cultural jobs. What data also showed us is that they have access to limited funds. So let's say if we have public funds for new film projects, only 1/3 of those funds go to female creators. We also see a lack of visibility. So you mentioned Prix Goncourt, but across the board, men tend to have more visibility, receive more awards, and have these key roles. And what does the data show us? So here I'm, again, showing pay gaps for each of the countries. We try to stick to one metric only, not to overwhelm you. But here we can see arts and culture here well below the overall gender pay gap in the economy, right? So situation has not improved with time as much in the overall economy, but we see it's actually much worse in the cultural sphere, right? There's a dip in 2014, and again, this might need more research, but this is also the year when the law on real gender equality was adopted in France, so this might account for some improvement, right? So legislation is helping in this case. On to Germany, an interesting use case because it's also a welfare country, there's a lot of support, but also some issues remain. Germany likes to portray itself, or it stands as a cultural nation, or Kulturnation, meaning that the government does not influence cultural institutions. So there's plenty of artistic freedom, right? All of these cultural institutions have their self-governing rights. And you can combine this with cultural federalism, where, you know, the central government here in Berlin does not have much say in what Bayern does, what Baden-Württemberg does, each of these federal states, and of course also localities. They each have their own cultural policy. Combine that also with the welfare model for the cultural policy of the country. We do have plenty of support mechanisms. One of them, and I'm sure you know this from your daily life, is the book price protection. But also, interestingly, the Artists' Social Insurance Fund, Künstlersozialkasse, where, as you can imagine, as a working artist, you can be a struggling artist, and making payments to your pension can be quite difficult. So here, the state takes over part of that load. Legislative quotas are a very important mechanism in achieving gender equality when it comes to Germany. And there are many rules and laws where we mandate the minimum number of women on executive boards, on organizations and such. However, and what data showed us and research is that there's this stigma of a quota woman, right? There's one token woman present on a board, and it's not portrayed as positively, I would say. But still, there's a trickle-down effect. So as long as there's one woman trying to add her voice or her perspective, it's still better than nothing, right? Good. Germany shows quite wide gender show gap or visibility gap. So awards and presence on juries would be one aspect. But also informal networks. So research also showed us that women struggle to get their foot in the door when it comes to informal networks, right? Because as a working artist, you might need an invite to a special event like this one, right? Working women artists might not have flexible working times to be able to make it to this event. And many of the decisions are made in these informal networks, and they do not always have access to these networks. Sometimes they're male networks, like in this case of architecture, and they're kind of pushed aside. Lastly, for Germany, I would point out that it's a well-developed economy in the sense we have high labor participation, women and men. But a very interesting finding was that more women work part-time. So if you compare this to a European average, you can see maybe 30, 20 plus points a difference to European average. How many women in Germany work part-time? Because maybe they're struggling to combine family, caregiving responsibilities, they opt for the part-time work. And as we saw from one of the previous charts, this widens not just the gender gap, but also the pension gap, right? Because they do not make contributions towards the pension at the end. And here again, what does gender pay gap show us? Quite intractable, I would say. So a small improvement from some 20% in 2010 to around 18-ish today. But as you can see, the state of women in cultural economy, so here at the very bottom, it's not as good, right? So it's around 30% of gender pay gap. Italy is also an interesting use case. And let's have a look why. So I mentioned that Germany had this high labor participation rate. But in the case of Italy, this is not true. Actually, this was the one country among the 7 that we've chosen for the study that had the lowest female labor participation, around 55%. But again, interesting fact is that more women held college degrees compared to men, also in this case. Again, depending on which part of the country you're looking at, but especially south of Italy, many of the societal norms or how women are portrayed, how women are getting access to different fields, this is all shaped by traditional values and on responsibility. So there's this view that women should be a caregiver, for example, and that's really, really pronounced in this case, where more women take up, again, part-time work, look after children, and focus on the family. Compared with other countries, the share of female cultural employment was quite low, I would say, around 40%. And this should be closer to parity because more women are studying arts and cultural fields, and then combined and translated over to cultural employment. It's actually near parity for EU average and other countries, but we see that Italy is actually below this threshold. And looking at gender equity or these pay gaps, we find that it's high at both ends. So either you are a low earner, you still earn less than your co-worker who is male and is doing similar work, or you might be a manager at at a culture institution as a woman, but you would still earn less than a comparable job of your male colleague. And maybe because there are so many structural issues that women face, we've noticed that there are also civil society initiatives who are trying to respond to this and advance gender equality. So we have Theatre Association of Women, we have Journalist Association, so they're trying to change this. And again, looking at the gender pay gap, I think the case of Italy is the most alarming one. So if you look at the very top, this is the economy overall, and the pay gap is quite low. It's around 5-ish%, so not that wide. But looking at cultural employment, it lies around 60%, which is quite shocking. Moving on to Poland, and you can also sense that we've picked countries so they are representative of different use cases. And on Poland, I can start by saying that been a country that went through important political transition, meaning that beforehand we had socialism and women and men were expected to participate in the labor market equally. So it was never a matter, is a man going to work or is a woman going to work? They both went, and then childcare was also taken care of for them. We see that wage gap is also lower because of this remnant of socialism and egalitarian, let's say, culture. Lately, under more conservative governments, let's say, we see a shift in these societal values, focusing more on the family, focusing more on the community. Now, maybe as a remnant of this egalitarian culture, Poland is an outlier because we do have the highest share of women in cultural employment, around 56%. And the net wealth, or your economic wealth, is evenly divided between men and women, something we do not see in other European countries, UK or the US, of course. What's maybe lacking in the case of Poland is a centralized cultural policy. There are a few gender mainstreaming efforts, and I would say maybe one or two institutions tackling this question. And again, as an example, data for Poland. Here, the top line will show us the pay gap in the economy overall, which is again not too wide, around 5 to 4%, and for women in culture, again, trailing off. Interestingly, in 2018, there was an overlap, but then it widened out again. Sweden is, I would say, a leader here among the countries we've researched on when it comes to implementing gender equality, sticking to the cause, and let's say rolling it out through different gender institutions. So let's have a look. In the case of Sweden, we do see strong gender equality, also will to change this, and across successive governments. So this might have started in the 90s, but we see still the cause is important today. And it might be also the case that the Swedish are proud of the egalitarian culture. It's almost like every organization is fighting who is going to be a more feminist one. So we have this principle of gender equality as a leading cause, right? And data speaks for that as well. So share of women parity, even above that in cultural workforce. However, some gaps do remain, of course. especially advancement to leadership positions in corporate boards and in pension earnings. And of course, data to confirm this, that again, the pay gap in the overall economy, the top line, sorry, apologies. The bottom line is actually the overall economy, and we see that the arts and culture employment or pay gap is improving over time. This was for the European countries. And just to have a better comparison, we have United Kingdom and United States as well. So let's have a look at not so welfare-based countries as well. Culture and creativity is, I would say, one of the pillars for the UK. It's the 5th largest exporter of cultural services. And apart from culture economy, there's this idea of creative industries. These two terms do overlap, but they're also not always the same. So cultural industries would also include software development, video games, and they see culture industries as driving innovation, driving the overall economy, right? And making the UK interesting for outside investment, drawing people in, increasing their soft power, and it's been a huge driver of their overall economy as well. Similar to other countries, there is parity in employment, of course. We are approaching parity there, but gender wage gap is still around 15%. The UK government also has very few gender mainstreaming mechanisms. It's almost like they've adopted this soft approach or giving guidelines, but not really implementing this as legislation. An interesting problem that we've found is also the unavailability of childcare, because most of childcare are private institutions, and this is again this again means high cost for families. And lastly, of course, this can be seen in data that Brexit did have some implications. Artists could not then freely move or find funds, and gender equality policy was, again, at the bottom of the list, right? It was not a priority. Here, this is the gender wage gap just for the cultural sector. And the year 2019, we did have COVID, so it might be the case there was some shuffle in employment. That's why we see the outlier. But otherwise, is gender pay gap unchanged. And last but not least, the US. Which, again, is not a welfare, but a liberal market economy. You remember I said for France, the idea was culture is our public good, it's not commercial. But in the case of the US, cultural economy is just like any other economy. There's limited funding for the arts and culture from the state. We do know that cultural economy from the US is very forceful and very lucrative. Access here is not that much of an issue, so there's gender parity in the workforce, but wage gaps are nevertheless quite high, both overall and cultural economy. There's no government or there's no federal mandate for parental leave or any childcare mechanisms here, or it varies depending on a state. I think California was one outlier where they had good mechanisms for this. But healthcare, parental leave is still an issue. For both the overall economy and the creative economy, we see some fluctuation, but not that much change. Interestingly enough, they are almost near the same number, around 25%. Yeah, hopefully that changes soon. Good. At this point, I would then give it over to Professor Anheier for the closing word.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Darinka. A few notes about conclusion. By the way, this is a very data-rich book. We only took an indicator around gender and pay, gender pay gap, but we look at many, many more facets, but that would have probably drowned out the entire evening. So we just limited to that, which is, of course, one of the key indicators you want to look at anyway. So I think gender inequality is lower in the cultural economy than it was 10 years ago, but that doesn't apply to all countries. And it happens when you have gender mainstreaming. And I think gender mainstreaming is the necessary condition for improvement. If you don't have gender mainstreaming, you end up looking like the United States or like the United Kingdom. If you have gender mainstreaming, you look more like Sweden, right? So it remains to be achieved, this equality, in all of the countries we looked at. And again, you only get improvements if you have a proactive government, a government that does not take gender mainstreaming seriously. You're not going to see any changes. And it sometimes, as Darinka said, it fluctuates. It's a bit better, and it goes back down again. So we will continue to live with the Frida Kahlo problem and the Bauhaus women problem for the time being. But it's probably less acute in 2024 than it was when Frida Kahlo painted and the Bauhaus women were active. So what happens if you get improvements? How do you get improvements? First of all, you need to have gender mainstreaming as an overall national policy approach, and that has to include arts and culture. Then you need a consensus around it, right? And if you don't have a consensus around it, you will not be able to implement gender mainstreaming and stay the course, because it's not going to change or see significant improvements from one year to the next. This is not one government's activities. This has to be an activity of successive governments, right? And then you have to follow up with that, and it needs to have some joint up government as well. So if you have that in place, then you get improvements. And of the countries we looked at, it was only Sweden that approached something like that. Right? And then perhaps France a bit, perhaps Germany a bit, and at the end you had the United Kingdom and the United States. So how do we get to gender mainstreaming? That's the key issue, right? So first of all, you need a very strong women's movement. But that women's movement needs to be able to push political agendas and find voice in government. Right? So the United States, of course, has a relatively strong women's movement, but it has not really made a lot of inroads and initiated political reforms. You could say, it's a slight overstatement, I know, but you could say nothing really happened, right, since the 1960s. Right? And now, only under the Biden administration did we see some initial attempts to do something about it, and I doubt that they are going to survive the Trump administration. Right? You need social values in favor of equality, and that's the lesson we have from Italy. Right? So it's very, very difficult to change things in Italy unless you have a value change in that society. Right? And you need the institutional capacities to advance gender mainstreaming. In a decentralized country like Germany and Poland, it is actually much more difficult than in a somewhat more centralized country than Sweden. And then you need relatively strong labor markets over time, right? That we don't have a situation where men push out women out of the labor force if we have consistently high unemployment, right? So there has to be parity in participation over a long period of time. That is also a key. And then you need to have networking to get into positions of power, right? And that is sometimes the work of generations. And we have many things positive to say about Sweden, but I think the networking aspect and how how women get into this position of power and become gatekeepers is still something to be achieved. So, but why do those gaps remain, even in countries like Sweden? And that's where we were very happy to discover the work of Claudia Goldin. As you know, she won the Nobel Prize in Economics just last year on exactly that topic that we were struggling with. And she said there's something of an ongoing conflict that happens and that affects many women and their partners, right? And you can think of arts and culture as a very greedy institution. It's a very demanding career, right? And it's not a 9-to-5 thing, but it absorbs you. Your personality is in it, right? And then you have family, and family is also a greedy institution. And what happens is after the first and second child, there is this trade-off that has to be reached. Is it a career or is it a family? And women are more likely to say, I'm going to go part-time and go back into the labor force later. And that's exactly when the pay gap and when the gender and pay gap and the pension gap sets in, right? So even if you have gender mainstreaming, you still need to work as a society on changing attitudes, right? And the attitudes have to be both on men and on women, so that the trade-off between two greedy institutions is not disproportionately at the expense of women. And I think that why this happens 1 million times every few days in any society, that's why we get these gaps and why they're so persistent. So institutional change is important, right? That's gender mainstreaming. Policies are important. That's gender mainstreaming. But it's also at a personal level that things would have to be different, right? So we make recommendations in the book how that could be done. I'd be more than happy to talk about it more. And there are things we can do about the gender trade-off, as you can see here. But it's more at a micro level. And I think that's where the deficit is at the moment. So let me thank you, but I also want to recognize the artist back there, Emilia Böhler. We see her work also on the to the right, and you see all those drawings as we went through them. So I very much look forward to the panel, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Anheier. Thank you very much, Darinka Marković, for the summary and for these insights. And we will take these insights with us onto the panel to discuss them here, where we want to talk about how we can shape a more inclusive future in the arts and culture. My guests on the panel, and I invite you to join me on stage, are Anja Schneider. She is a DJ, producer, radio broadcaster, and label boss, celebrated for her innovation and influence in electronic music. Please be my guest. Honored with the honor prize by the Berlin Music Commission in 2021 for her outstanding impact on the music scene. Anja Schneider continues to shape the industry as one of its most vital figures. She helms Sus Music, a label showcasing her innovative productions, and she hosts Club Room, which is a weekly radio show, and Club Room Backstage, a podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to discuss these points with you.
Very happy to have you. I welcome Anneli Strömqvist. She has please welcome on the stage. She has an extensive professional background in the cultural scene sector in both Sweden and Germany. Until September, she worked at the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, where she managed the international program for dance and circus, and a lot of other things we will maybe discuss later. Previously, she held roles at the Chamber Ensemble, the Kullberg Ballet and Dansens Hus, amongst others. And since September, she holds the position of Counsellor for Cultural Affairs at the Embassy of Sweden in Germany. Very warm welcome. We're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I welcome Els van der Plas, although it was a long journey, but she made it. A warm welcome to you. We were very happy to have you. She came from the Netherlands. She's the director of the Allard Pierson in Amsterdam. Before that, she served as general director and chair of the board at the Dutch National Opera and Ballet in Amsterdam and as managing director of the Bonnefanten in Maastricht. She's an art history graduate and she has held numerous leadership positions at institutions such as the Gate Foundation, the Prince Claus Fund, and Premsela. So she has a wide experience, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today. A very warm welcome to you. And I welcome to the stage Darinka Marković. She will join us on stage for the discussion. There was Sarah Wedl-Wilson, who was supposed to be on the stage, but she cannot make it tonight. So Darinka was so kind to join us, and I think that's a really good idea because then we can talk a little bit more about the data. So with this, we start. We just Darinka, maybe after you've taken a drink, I would like to start with you. Because we heard all these impressive data and numbers. I would like to you as a data person that you are and really analytics. From this research, what surprised you most looking at the numbers? You need to take the microphone, please. And
yes, of course. Yes. This works. Yes, data savvy and fact lover. I would say we saw the Frida Kahlo problem, right? And maybe in a slightly different way, because we said, well, what if Frida Kahlo did not have access to the education as Pablo Picasso, right? But what we see in data across the board for all the countries is that 2/3 of students in journalism, in arts and culture programs are women. But then along the way, something happens. It's like a leaky pipeline that they go into workforce. We saw then the parity drops around 2/2 or like near parity, 50% women are in the workforce. And as the time goes on, they go into part-time work. They do not receive visibility that they deserve. There's like trail-off effect that they disappear from the workforce, which I found really, really interesting.
And I saw a lot of you nodding earlier when we were looking at the presentation. I want to quote from the book right in the beginning. I think you write, and I quote, "Power relations, inequalities, and exclusionary structures play as large a role in the fields of arts and culture as in other fields." And you showed these exclusionary processes and structures with the Nobel Prize and, in arts and culture. Anneli Strömqvist, how difficult is it nowadays to get access to networks, to the art market, to patronage, to all these reward systems and support systems as a woman, from your experience, because you've also worked in this field for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different art fields, and I worked for a Swedish Arts Grants Committee, which is a Swedish behörde för kulturförderung. And I know the statistics from who applies and who will get the money. And we were really very detailed about that the pressure of the applications would come out in the same representation. And what you said about the amount of women within the education system, it's really the same way in Sweden. And when you get up in the hierarchy, less women stays and more men staying. That's the same system in Sweden. What we see is that there is different education or leadership programs pushing the fronts also within the theater or the performing arts world, for instance. They also organize some leadership programs, for instance, for women to be theater directors, leading houses, like intendanten, which I think is a good way to do it. Yeah, even if Sweden, it seems like Sweden is very good, there is still so many things to do, and what could be said is, of course, that society structures cannot be solved by the creative sector. It needs to be solved by a social structure from the society. We have good systems, welfare systems, but I think the one thing that really, really makes a difference is the tax system, because in the beginning of the 70s, we changed the tax systems. We don't tax joint, we do it individually. And it really pushes forward the situation, and I think we don't talk enough about the tax systems in different countries.
It's one of the points that you're making in your book, Darinka, and in Germany, this is also one of the main problems, no? I mean, just quickly talking about this.
Yeah, that's true. I would agree, especially in the case of Germany, slightly France, the spouse tax. So there's a trade-off again where two partners are both working, then again, trade-off happens because one person earns more, right? And then the decision needs to be made, well, who will remain at work and who will maybe be in charge of caregiving or childcare. And usually, again, the woman or the mother will stay at home because, again, translated into this old tax system is that second person is taxed halfway more than an individual in this spousal system. So a trade-off is, well, it doesn't make sense for me to go back to work because taxes will eat off my gross pay, so I'll just stay at home and to take care of the kids. And I'm sure this is something you know from your daily lives as well.
Absolutely. We will surely talk about this a little bit more. In the book also you write, and I quote again, what is more, they, the women, tend to be underrepresented on the boards of corporations and major cultural organizations, as well as in governmental ministries and agencies that make decisions about policies, strategies, appointments, awards, salaries, and benefits of many kinds, quote end. And this is also something that Professor Anheier said earlier. Now, Els van der Plas, you are one of these maybe rare examples, if we look at this, of a woman who has broken this infamous glass ceiling. And you held different leadership roles in your career. So you are one of these rare role models that are needed, you know, that young women need to see. So what would you say can young women learn from you and from your career? What is the best way to break these glass ceilings? What can you do, and how can you enter these networks that are needed?
Yeah, that's not one easy answer, of course, but maybe to tell a little bit how I started my career. When I graduated, it was 1986. And there was a big, there were no jobs, basically. So I thought, well, maybe I set up something myself. So I set up an organization that focused on non-Western contemporary art, also very specialized. But because I set it up, I became the director. So I started basically as a director in my own organization. And that helped me a lot, because I just said, okay, I have this organization, and now I am the director. So I did that for 10 years, and then I applied for the next job, which was a director. And I had experience, but I mean, of course, I was very young. But it was I never thought about it, but looking back, yeah, it was basically a bold thing to do. But also, I just, yeah, I didn't have another choice than become the director. But next to that, I think there are absolutely things that don't help, like the tax system, or, for example, if you have children, the cost for the child care. Well, it was not by choice, but I don't have children of my own, which helped me a lot. Because I at the opera I had to, start at 7 and I was there till 12 if I had to. So that gave me the opportunity to be there, but I don't think it's a good thing. I think, because I always think that women with children are the best employees because they can organize, they can manage, and even the best is even when they have more children than one, because then they really know how to manage. So I think it's also it's also something how you perceive things and what is your attitudes and your values, and so that's also I think important. And maybe the last thing to mention, but I think the how would I say, the leadership form. I mean, I think women are different leaders than men, and that's a generalization that is terrible in a way. But I think if we open up more to other kinds of leadership, it will also help women or. Yeah, women, or so not a standard CEO-like person. So that's also something. And I think we have to, I mean, not we as women, but we as men and women have to break that kind of attitude, but also the perception of what kind of leadership you need to drive an organization. And for me, it was always very difficult to really be strong enough to show that other kind of leadership, and and that's not easy. So so that's a few remarks.
I find it interesting how you use the system to go get into your position. But it's also one point you said is interesting about the working hours, because this is also something that is mentioned in the book, and I think it's the theater in Jena, I'm not 100% sure anymore, in the Germany example, where they did change the times of rehearsals in order to make it more friendly for families or for women to, be there during the day and not come at night. And so the structures have to change, as you say. It's about, making it a point of changing.
And it's something good to take care of your children. It's also it has to be seen as a big value in society and very necessary. So, and that's also, I think, important.
Yeah. Anja Schneider, I want to bring you into this discussion. We've seen some examples of exclusions earlier in the presentation, like the ones in literature, in the museums, so in arts. But I would like to add one from the music world, where you come from. According to a study from the music tech company A2D2 that I read, it's from last year, female DJs, which you are said to play twice as many shows as male DJs. And that's because the study revealed that women may have to work twice as hard as men to reach the same recognition. They used the data from, I don't know, the DJ Mag's Top 100. I don't know that, but you probably do. And so although there's only 11 female artists that appear on the 100 strong list, they report that they account for 40% of the top 10 hardest working DJs. Can you relate to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering that's even 11. I think this year it was even less women on the list. When I started, it was in the beginning of the 90s, there were only a few. So this was even much harder to make your way or to get recognized. I got judged 1,000 times, of course, about technical things and from male DJs, all these things. I think everyone has her own story about this. But then after the pandemic, I could see a change, which I was really, really happy because especially in the scene where I'm coming from, I would say it's more subcultural, it's more open, it's more diverse. I think the scene was demanding a lot of women. And so nowadays we have a lot of women in the club scene, but not on this range where the top DJs and the top money is going to make. But for example, I read also a statistic about the festival lineup. 2012, there was on the whole world, the festivals, there was 9.2% of women artists playing, and this changed now to 30%. So I could say we are on a good way, and if I see it now and if I look to my colleagues, we have a lot of great women DJs, and it's changing. It's not ranking in the top list for several reasons, probably not networking, I think we always take ourselves not so serious, but we are really serious in our art. So that means we are not like, when we are on the billing, for example, there's like a huge poster for festivals, and we are standing not at the top. Mostly it's for women, like, it's fine, we are on the festival, you know. Men make a huge thing about it. So I think, anyway, we are on a good way, especially when it comes to my terms, to music.
But I think, so because it's interesting what you say, that like festivals are, I think a lot of festivals are making a point of gender mainstreaming, right? They're making a point of including more women because they realized, oops, if I look at the list, we have mainly bands that are male dominated, or, you know, maybe they have one singer background, I don't know. But this is something where they're actually making a point of including more women.
Absolutely, I think the scene was demanding it, and after all the pandemic, there's a completely new generation. They were lost. They were having no art, and they had nothing in 2 years, and suddenly there was a completely new way of going out and demanding things. And I think they were loud enough. They had not maybe this political connections, but they said, hey, we want to have more diverse lineups, and it's now happening, which is wonderful. And if you see to the pop music, because I'm coming from, you know, subcultural things, I mean, the most impressive and highest income musician is at the moment is a woman. It's Taylor Swift. Which is good.
Yes.
If you like it or not, but at least, you know, we are on a good way.
Yeah, but I think pop music is probably also something else than like something more independent. But it's interesting that you say that, because we were talking a lot about gender pay gap. So how difficult is it for a young DJ to make a living and to establish herself? Like, is it more difficult than for a man still? I assume yes, but...
Yeah, I think it is, but it's always difficult when you start as an artist, you know. But of course, I don't have the statistic. I would say yes. It's at the moment I'm really to say I'm on a positive way. I can't really say that there is a difference between like a starter as a male as a female. I think both of them is really difficult, and I would even assume, and I think this is something where I'm going to be. Yeah, very hard out of the window. I would say for men, it's at the moment much harder for a young man. I'm sorry, but maybe it's time to.
Yeah,
you know.
It's interesting. Annelies, you said something earlier about the Swedish Arts Grant where you worked before the committee, and you were giving out grants. And this is also something where you said, you know, we were looking women, men. I don't know. How did you manage gender mainstreaming? Was there a policy for gender mainstreaming? How were grants given? Did they have to be equal? How was it working?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is if it's 50-50, as long as the world looks that way. So that was the target. But we were also mirroring if there is so many arts fields where women are dominating. It's only, I think, in the music scene where male artists are more than the female artists. So, and this was the target, I would say, to mirror that. So if it's in the dance scene, maybe 75% women, then it's okay that 75% of the granted money goes to women as well. I think it's interesting with the quota thing, because what we see is, of course, just the threat of a quota could be very efficient as well.
Because in Sweden there is no such thing as quotas, right?
Yeah, it was some years ago by the former director of the Swedish Film Institute. She was very hated because she really wanted to push the limits and the borders, and this really raised a big discussion about is quotas good or bad, and it's so hard to be a man nowadays because you won't get any money. But I think it's good just to push the borders and to discuss these things, because you need, I mean, you need the rights, you need the resources, and you need the representation. I mean, it's 3 headlines.
Yeah, because you have a very good. You can say how the situation, where you see the situation in Sweden, but you also see the situation in Germany. How would you say, where's the main differences looking at these two countries when it comes to grants and scholarships given to artists? Can you see a difference?
I think what you mentioned before with the federal system, it's harder to have a kind of national statistics and national grant giving. Yeah, what's the difference? Oh my God, it's so many. Germany is so much bigger. It's more than 8 times bigger. So of course you have so many more. I read somewhere today that 50% of all the orchestras in the world are located in Germany. Could that be true? I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, of course there is a lot of working possibilities for musicians, for instance. But I think the interesting thing is with the educations where it's full of young women, and yeah, I think just like what you said about Taylor Swift, I think I tried to look about with visual artists who are the most paid visual artists in Sweden. I couldn't really figure it out, but I'm not so sure it's a man. I think there is a bunch of women really earning good money in every art field. I think that the music field is the hardest, and I know there is a lot of projects also in Germany where Germany and Sweden collaborate when it really comes to these lost talents and how to avoid them. So I think it's good collaboration, bilateral.
That's very important, yeah. I would like to come back to something that you said, Else, with the different leadership, like that women maybe lead different or have different priorities also, or see also things that men don't see. And I read something interesting on your LinkedIn page. You were a general director and chair of the board at the Dutch National Opera and Ballet in Amsterdam, as I said earlier. And you wrote somewhere, it's a small thing, but I found it interesting. You pointed out that there was a refurbishment in the time while you were there of a building. And amongst other things, of course, you added more ladies' toilets. And you were like, exclamation mark. And I'm sure every woman who visits the Dutch National Opera will thank you, because we all know as women how infamous the queues in front of women toilets are anywhere in the world. So, I mean, I think this is a small thing, but it shows something bigger, because I'm not sure, but I would say that a man would not even have thought about this. So it's...
No, it's true. It was the first thing I did, actually. But because there were always rows at the ladies' toilets. And the funny thing was, when we rebuilt the toilets, the rows shifted to the men's toilet. That was not my intention, but so they started to complain, of course, and I thought, well, now you know.
Exactly,
But yeah, that was the first thing I did, and it's true. You see other things, like men see other things too, of course, than women. But yeah, I think if the leadership is always a man, and then a woman steps in, and it's a generalization, of course, but I'm sure, yeah, she will see other things and then the man did, and that will change things. Yeah, absolutely.
Because the Netherlands are not included in this study. Maybe Darinka can tell us why, but what do you think about quotas, or what is the policy about quotas? Because Anneli was talking about them. What is the policy in the Netherlands?
Yeah, we don't have quotas.
And what do you think? Is this good?
I'm for quotas, but that's just, I've always been, because I was also in this organization, I set it myself, and later on in the Prince Claus Foundation, which those two organizations focused on art from non-Western, we don't say it anymore, artists. And of course they were also discriminated upon a lot, especially in the European Museum. So yes, I knew how difficult it was to get somebody in who is very good, but the system doesn't accept him or her. So at a certain moment I thought, yeah, we have to have quotas, because else it won't change. And I remember that the government set up in the Netherlands sort of a committee that needed to get more women in the boardrooms in companies. And they said, we won't do quotas, but we strive for a 25% of women in the boards. And I thought, why 25? You know, it should be 50. And that, so for me, those kind of steps are good, of course, because it will help, because the government said something and said it is necessary, etc. But I think, I'm for quotas, and because it goes faster. The thing is, it also triggers conflict, because then they say, oh, you're there because you are a woman, but it will change things. And even if you're not doing a good job, maybe the next person will also be a woman. So it will change, and I think that we need that. So this pro, how do you say that? So the opposite of discrimination. I'm for it. Yeah.
Before I maybe open the floor to questions, I have one more question to Darinka, because I would like to go back to the reconciliation of work and family life, because we talked about this, you have talked about it, we heard from you in your presentation about it. You said also in your book, one way to stem pay and pension disparities is to ensure that women can not only return to the workplace, but then also balance the demands of work and family life. The burden of which still falls mainly on women in all 7 countries. And Professor Anheier was saying, you know, quoting Claudia Goldin, who said that it is a conflict between very greedy institutions. Now there is, and I don't know if this maybe plays in, but I was reading this article and I had to think about this immediately. So there is a trend now on social media called trad wives. So there's young women who going back to being traditional housewives and their traditional family roles, and they post about it on the social media. And they don't believe that in feminism that says you can be at all a good mother, a good wife, and good at your job. And I was wondering, is maybe the problem that we still don't have policies that make it possible that all of this is possible, because we still have this gender pay gap, we have the pension gap, we have at the end, as you said, like the gender gap in poverty risk for women 65 and older is huge. I mean, is this maybe something where people think, it's easier actually to go back to how it used to be, and it's simple, don't have to fight as much? I don't know, I mean, it's just something I thought about.
Yeah, on the phenomenon of trad wives, maybe I cannot comment on. Maybe it's a backlash to all of the affirmative policies or modern policies that we have. But to your question, yes, a lack of childcare does affect pension gaps. So we saw that as women enter childbearing years, they leave the workforce, and again, commitments to your pension plan then disappear. I would here mention the concept of parental leave. I think what Sweden showed us was that both women and men share the responsibility, right? So, and they split these weeks, how many weeks they get per law. And maybe why not try with that? Maybe why does one partner needs to stay at home, become a trad wife or trad husband, and take care of children, both of them?
So that works well. And would you say from experience that it does work well in Sweden? This?
Not really.
No, not really?
No, I mean, we have a good parental leave system, but it's most women using the time off with the children. And it's very systematic that man stays at work and women stays at home. So, and the... what do you call it, the unpaid households work is, of course, the big topic. I think there is this quote, can't remember who said it, is that the working class women are solving the middle class women's equality problems. Yeah, so we just give it further to who's going to clean at home, who's going to take care of and this is of course the really struggle if you're supposed to work full time and you shall be so functional and perfect and structural. as a woman you should be everything, and then you of course crash.
Yeah, so there is room for improvement even in Sweden, which is the best of the top of the pops here in this. Is there questions from the audience? Yes, there are. I would like to open the floor. Do we have a microphone? Yes. So maybe you can tell us, be so kind to tell us your name. Yes, first question here. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jana, and I just wanted to thank everyone, all the panelists, for being here tonight. And of course, there are so many facets of this topic that we could discuss. But I wanted to bring up one from my personal experience and direct my question to anyone who wants to answer it, but especially to Elsa, because you brought something up that I think was really valuable and important from my perspective. So my background is in video games. And of course, this is part of the cultural sector, and it's a part of the cultural sector that is notoriously sexist. And I went into it knowing this, and I would assertively, and in some cases I would say aggressively, penetrated these networks that were quite closed to women in a lot of cases. I always wanted to be in a leadership role, and I always wanted to work for these high-profile companies, but then I achieved these goals, and I found the conditions intolerable. First of all, the conditions at these high-profile companies, and second of all, the conditions of leadership. And this happened to so many women at my level that I knew, where either they would have to leave, or they would have to change themselves to a degree that made them unrecognizable as the people that they were before they entered these leadership roles. And so I was wondering if this was something that you experienced and what you did to combat it, or what you did to stay true to your own values in these situations.
Thank you.
Very good point. Absolutely, and that's
leaky pipeline. I leaked out of it. I'm not in the industry anymore.
Yeah. It's a pity that. Well, I think when you persevere, that's good, because we need more women on at the top. And if you're only one woman at the top, then it's very difficult. But if we have more women at the top, it becomes more easy. But I recognize what you're saying, and I also recognize sometimes I also left because of it, of course. And still, I think it's very important to be there and to hopefully change also the leadership culture, if you want. And I always think of Thatcher. Thatcher was a sort of woman, a sort of almost male person in a way. And she was a woman, and she was on top, and she did well, if you want. But so I always wonder how did she manage, being up there like Merkel at the same. I mean, you can think a lot about these women, but it's good that they were there, and that you see that these women were on top of the world, and that it's possible. But at the same time, we have to have more people, more women like that, to be able to change leadership culture, I think.
One question, because I would like to know, maybe from you, but is this the structures? Is it because the structures are male structures that they are so intolerable, or that they are designed for men? What makes it?
Yeah, well, maybe to give an example, at the opera and ballet, I had a board which was mainly, so I was the director, and I had two co-directors, opera and ballet. And I was the chair of the board, but we had to agree on everything. I was not the boss, so that was the board. And then you had a board of trustees, and there were mainly male CEOs. And CEOs of big companies. So first of all, they didn't know the culture, if you want, but they were there because they were the CEO of a big company. So for them, it was a power seat. So that the whole system of that network, that CEOs say to the other CEO, maybe you want to you know, sit on the board of trustees of opera and ballet. It's very nice and it's very interesting. We can have a drink afterwards. I think we don't do that well, the women networks. We don't give each other jobs, you know. We do that very badly, I think. We should do that much better, because then we can change things. But yeah, so I had this sort of male, yeah, in a way it's normal because it's a traditional thing. So I don't blame them or something, but it's there. So you have to deal with it. And I think, yeah, we should be there also to be able to change it. Yeah.
Next question over there.
I mean, we are actually very privileged to be here tonight. I think everybody agrees, and I'm particularly starstruck when I'm looking at now Anja Schneider. I'm a strategist and author based in London, and in my recently published book, which is about the topic of resilience, I tried to cover as many different sectors as possible and asked more than 30 people, mostly executives, what kept their industries, their companies, and themselves resilient during the latest crisis since the beginning of the COVID. And art is one of the main subjects in my book. And I tried to go as high as possible in terms of reaching people in the art world. And I was lucky actually having Hans-Ulrich Obrist as the main part of the book. When I was having those, maybe I should, yeah. When I was having those interviews with the art world, one topic that comes forward is the inclusion of the corporate world to support the art world. Although especially in the UK, we have this large contentious issue about which kind of company should be allowed to support art. For example, I'm coming from the oil and gas background because it was the industry when I left school 25 years ago. Now oil and gas companies are not that much welcome to support the art institutions. But then cement companies, glass companies are welcome. But again, you can also discuss this. So my question is, we are seeing many companies now funding their own foundations to support the art world. But one thing missing is the condition of supporting the women artists or prioritizing women artists in terms of which exhibitions to support. So in your experience, in your research, when you were developing your book, have you had any encounter, direct encounter with the corporate world? And have you had a chance to analyze their policies? Because on the corporate side, they are very vocal about supporting female employees up to the executive positions. But this is not necessarily reflected when it comes to run to those institutions and supporting the women artists. This is my first question, and the second question will be much shorter. When you look at the gender equality, have you also looked at the racial pay gap? Because this is also a big topic, especially in the UK for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess it's to Darinka.
Yes. So the first question was, why didn't we cover, or did we cover corporate? Well, as you saw, we were mostly focusing on governments and gender mainstreaming, how these mechanisms work. So corporate world was, again, not scope of the book. Otherwise, it would have blown up to 500 pages, maybe. But what we've noticed is that private trusts or these private initiatives are very much at the center of support in the United States, right? Because there are no government mechanisms. Then you would have maybe foundations, even philanthropy, so individuals contributing to the cause. So that would be on the first question shortly. And the second one was, if you could repeat, I think I missed it.
Have you also looked at the racial pay gap within the same gender group?
At that detail, also not. So this was a general overview.
Thank you. There's other questions. I think I saw, yes, over there. Okay.
Hello, thank you everyone. My name is Charlotte and I'm a creative director from the Netherlands as well. And I did not name myself creative director, I should have, but I came up the normal way, intern, junior, senior art director. But my question is actually directed at Professor Anheier and Darinka, because when I became director of a team of designers of 10, I got insight into the finance side of the company. And it really shocked me because the disparity was appalling. And so I didn't understand. My predecessors were also 2 women, but they also didn't ring the alarm bell of why are we paying men more for the same exact role? And they're sometimes doing a worse job, actually. And knowing the team, how can you pay somebody $20,000 less, because I was working in the States, and I just don't understand, why this is happening. And so I pushed really, really hard. I had to promote people just to get them to the same pay grade. And I was able to make a difference within my team, but it took a lot of effort with leadership. So when I look at your gender inequality charts, I'm curious, are you looking at the broad picture, at the same role, comparing the same exact number? Or are you taking into account that women are becoming part-time? Or are the numbers going down because fewer women are in the workforce because they might be staying at home?
Maybe the last part that you mentioned, just to clarify, the charts was the unadjusted gender pay gap, meaning for 2 sectors was media and communication and arts and culture. And this is according to Eurostat methodology. So again, we try to keep it as comparable as possible across these 5, or if you include UK, 6 European countries. But no, we did not adjust this to specific professions or part-time work, although we do have, again, more research, but not part of this evening, on part-time and self-employed, for example, employees. But also thank you for trying to make a difference within your own team and your own field, first on that.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Yes, over there.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this wonderful evening. Thanks to Helmut, who invited me at the last moment. And I can also say, yes, I'm a creative director. I started my gallery at the age of 51 in Berlin, a place which is full of galleries, and there is not a single door open for you, especially if you come from a foreign background. And I have survived 13 years, and I plan to survive further. But now I want to ask this wonderful panel over here. We've been talking about networks. A person like me would not fear entering any places. But I have seen that I have not been allowed to enter certain places. Especially, there was also a thought expressed that we women do not support women. And especially if there's somebody who's from a totally different cultural background, she would also not be supported even more further. So my question and a request would be, what would you advise? How does one enter these influential networks? I represent people from other countries. White people in the white countries get the chances, and there are more possibilities for them. But people who come from different backgrounds, I come from India, I show people from South Asia, and other people who do not get many possibilities here in Berlin to do even their first show. So it's not that they are not good artists. I'm really looking for discussions to understand how to get them on a better position, take them further. Because it's not just about making money. It is about positioning certain discussions and bringing a little bit more reflection into making a world a better place.
Thank you very much. Who wants to start?
It's a very good point, because we talk about the gender equality tonight, but it would be more important to talk about equality in general. Yes. In Sweden, I would say the last 10 years, we have also been focusing very much about representation in general, about intersectionality, really talking about who's allowed on stage in a symbolic way, and which kind of bodies are allowed on stage, and whose voices are being heard. And I mean, it's really a fact that it's also very much about the social class perspective. So what we have talked about tonight is very easy to apply on so many other different layers to talk about equality and the resources and the representation. Yes, you're totally right.
Is there maybe concrete tips else that you could give?
Yeah,
how to enter these networks?
Yeah, thank you for your remark also and question. Yeah, if I look at my personal career, I was helped a lot by men, basically, because they were in places at that time that I wasn't allowed to, but they were, and they helped me. Sometimes even when I didn't know it. So. So that I think is very important, that the network is all of us. And secondly, I think I believe also in a network of women, because I notice a lot that we, and also I, don't do enough for women in our field. And I think we always have to be aware of that. So that, I think, is also important. And to be able to enter is really also putting people, if you're able to, in higher places. Because I think if we can push persons that are not seen enough or whatever, and you can put them on a pedestal, then they will have influence. And I think people that are on a pedestal or are within that network can do that, then yeah, they should do that. But sometimes they even don't realize it, that they are in such a position. But I think, yeah, we have to be more aware of that.
Anja, do you have maybe from your scene, from your experience, a tip how to enter these networks, how to, you know?
It's for me also a problem. When I heard you, I also sometimes, especially as a woman, networking in my case, in my scene, means sometimes going out, or after the club gig, going to an after party or hanging together. And this is sometimes for me, it's first of all not interesting, second of all, because I want to sleep. I have also a family. For me, the times are also quite difficult. So I'm still, I was hearing you, but I don't have an initial clue or a great answer to say how we can network, especially also in my case. Nowadays, thank God, in my scene, we have also the social media. You can make the world looking more fantastic as it is and more connected, unfortunately, but this also sometimes is helping, you know, then you don't have to be actual there and connect with everyone on times where I'm not so, which is not fitting so well and good into your life.
Thank you. Since we're slowly running out of time, one last question from the audience, and then I have to wrap it up. I'm sorry. Yeah, over there.
I have a comment and a question. So the comment is, my area is well-being research. And from this point of view, inequality is a loss-loss scenario. So it's not that women miss out on career opportunities, it's that men miss out on relationship wealth. And we look at this over a lifespan. So regret hits men later in life of all the years they have missed. So I think this, knowing that, gives us more motivation, completely, you know, regardless of gender, that it is important to change this inequality for various reasons. People are missing out. Men are missing out on relationship wealth. women are missing out on career growth, and society is missing out on talent, essentially, right? So I think that perspective is, you know, it's not only about men maybe having to queue longer to go to the bathroom, or things, you know, for DJs getting a little bit trickier, male DJs, because they are now up against female DJs as well. Anyway, so I hope that might add a nuance there. My question is about the, it was mentioned, the greedy institutions, and there's the home institution, and there's, you know, organizations. And it was said that women are more likely to take on the greedy home institution. And I was wondering whether you know why that initially is. Why are women more likely to take on the greedy home institution? Beginnings matter, I think, you know.
Social norms, I guess, but yeah.
I think you're on the right track. So one is definitely societal norms. So in the case of Italy, there's still the expectation to focus on family, not on career. And what you mentioned in the case of Sweden, that yes, numbers might say one thing, we're approaching gender equality, but parental leave is not divided as equally, right? Because there's still stigma of stay-at-home father. So that's pushing shoulders, right? So firstly, societal norms that we need to change. Gendered bias. Most of you this evening mentioned you had to work your way through. You had to work twice as hard. So we are judging women on past achievements and not maybe potential, right? So when they're entering workforce, maybe there's the stigma already. Will you make it to a leadership role? Will you complete the full pipeline of your career? And maybe they're kind of then left on the sidelines saying, well, not the potential that we're looking at. So again, multiple factors, but one of them definitely societal norms and gender bias that we can change, I think all of us.
And money, because in Sweden men earn more money than women. So if you're taking your parental leave, the family loses money if the man stays at home.
And not just in Sweden, as we've seen everywhere in the world, I think. So thank you very much for this input. One last question from my side to all of you, with the hope of a concise answer, which I know is probably difficult, but I'll try it nevertheless. So from your experience working in this field, in the cultural scene, what would be your concrete demands that, you know, we have better gender mainstreaming, that we have more of a balance for work and life? What could governments do? What needs to happen that we get there? I mean, of course, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but that we see a process and not fall back, as we've seen on these charts. Maybe Anja starts over there.
Okay, I start in my point of view, because I said already that I'm looking really positive in the future, but when I look or answer your question, I'm very grateful that we have women, but I'm doubting or wish that this woman are playing now a main role in my musical genre, not using this typical weapon because they are women, because I want that women gonna be recognized for their art and not for being a woman or playing this role which initial people think she has to do. And this would be my wish.
Anneli, yes?
Awareness, and you mentioned it in your study, the consensus that shouldn't really depend on different governments. The policies should be just continuing forward, and we should talk about it because we all want some kind of fairness, and it's equal for everyone. And just to talk about equality and not only gender equality. Yeah.
Absolutely. Health?
Yeah, regulations, I think, and targets are good and necessary in a way. But I would also like that we look back in history, because I like the comment of you about that, you know, by not having this equal society, everybody's missing out on something. So I like that remark, but we're also missing out on, in the history of art or any history of any discipline, on great female artists and thinkers and scientists. And it would be very good that we're also looking back and that we find examples who help us also to realize that they were just written out of history. I'm just working at I can't be too long, I know, but I work at the Allard Pierson, and it's part of university, and they have great collections, university collections. And I found out that in the 17th century, you had in the Netherlands great women artists, and they were really very famous, and writers, theater players, etc. And they did really, really well. And in the 19th century, they were written out of history, because in the 17th and 18th century, they were still there. And I was wondering, why is that? But that was really because of the norms and values in the 19th century, that they were written out of that history. And I thought, okay, then we have to write them in history again. But yeah, so I think we have also historically work to do.
I mean, it's the two phenomena that you mentioned, the lost Frida Kahlo problem and the lost Bauhaus problem. Yeah. So yeah, it's exactly these two that we really need to focus on. Darinka, what's...
Yes, maybe just short on what governments can do, also what Professor Anheier mentioned, and what one of our recommendations is from the book is consistent gender mainstreaming. So we saw these breaks when COVID pandemic hit, that budgets were adjusted and gender equality was not on the table anymore. And then we can see this in wage gaps, again, widening. So definitely consistency and over multiple governments, right? So not just one government with a mandate and then next government has a different priority. It needs to have a succession as well.
Absolutely, as you said, with the Biden administration and Trump coming in. So let's see what will happen there. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for. We already run over time. So thank you so much for all of you for being here, for taking the time and for the discussion. Thank you so much to Darinka Marković and for Professor Anheier for presenting the study and these insights. And thank you so much for this discussion here on the panel, to Anja Schneider, Anneli Strömqvist and Ed van der Plas for sharing your valuable insights and your time with us, for being here. Thank you so much. Yes, this is your applause. For everybody who's here in Berlin, have a safe trip back home and a good evening. Thank you for everybody who joined us in the live stream for being with us. And yes, have a wonderful rest of the evening and goodbye.